Unga sangla unga mazu. Hoko. 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 America, Mashu, Hoko. Hoko. Guyo kana gwa imbwa manje tine takatoshatirwa zvokushatirwa zviya akungoimbwi pose pose ipapo gwakaimbwa nokuti verudzi gwekedu kaona voimba guyo uku kachero kuri kurwa havachadzokeri kumashure vanotoperera.
Taiona moto marongera vanoita wepanyika vanoda kudisu vamwe tioneswe moto dai pasina kupindira kwaishe nechokwadi pasi pano taiona moto marongera vanoita wepanyika vanoda kudisu vamwe tioneswe moto dai pasina kupindira kwaishe kana dzimba dzedu dzingadai dziri dzavo mawanzira vanoita dzimba dzavo vanoda kudisu vamwe tigare mumiti dzimba 10 pamunhu mumwe chete vanoda kudisu vamwe tigare mumiti dzimba 10 pamunhu mumwe chete vanoda kudisu vamwe tigare mumiti dai pasina kupindira kwaishe nechokwadi pasi pano taiona moto.
Welcome viewers to this edition of The Situation Right Now, brought to you proudly by Heart and Soul TV and Radio in partnership with Makrad. Now, we are following up on the Chilonga issue, the Chilonga case, where over 12,000 villagers are on the line to be removed from the land that they have been occupying for years in their lives. This is their homes. This is where they have been practicing their tradition for a very long time. They've also been doing subsistence farming on this land, and they have been surviving on it, farming sorghum, small millets, drought-resistant crops, and have massive partnerships with companies that come through and allow them to farm on contractual basis and sell. So they have been shipping tons and tons of sorghum, of barley that is used to make the beer that you drink there at home. Now, in studio this afternoon, I'm joined by one of the lawyers from the Zimbabwe Lawyers for Human Rights, and they have been following this case, and we're going to be discussing the legalities and illegalities of this land seizure, if I could call it, for a lack of a better word. So I'm joined by Shava, and Shava also is Shangani, so this thing is close to his name. Shava, thank you for joining us and welcome to this show.
Thank you, Blessed. I'm glad to be part of this program.
Can you just greet our viewers in Shangani for us?
Minjani vakaina, nimina shakalamwina, namutla, ileno, ivalavula, ehleni kamasima mwina, kechilonga. Let me say that I'm not a Shangan speaking person. but I grew up in Chikombedzi. I'm born and bred in Chikombedzi, and from grade 1 to grade 3, I learned Shangaan. I even wrote exams, and I did very well in class in that language. So I identify with my people there in Chikombedzi more than anything else.
Yeah. Now let us talk about the statutory instrument, Obey, that was put out by government. Can you just explain to us what it means and the legality or illegality of so doing?
Thank you. On the 26th of February 2021, Statutory Instrument 50 of 2021 was gazetted. The effect of that statutory instrument is to set aside something like 12,940 hectares of land in Chilonga for the production of lucerne. I understand that there has been an amendment to indicate that the purpose for which the land was set aside was for irrigation, but that will not take away the legalities or illegalities of that statutory instrument. The effect of that statutory instrument is to permanently deprive the people of Chilonga of their land. It makes it clear that they ought to depart permanently, and it is with immediate effect. Now, there are so many issues surrounding the legalities of that statutory instrument, but we will focus on a few legal impediments to that statutory instrument. The first illegality is that there is also Statutory Instrument 51 of 2021, which was gazetted simultaneously with 50 of 2021. Now, Statutory Instrument 51 of 2021 has the effect of making the same land which was set aside for the production of lucerne to be state land. By virtue of Statutory Instrument 51 of 2021, that land ceases to be part of the communal land. It is now the state land. So it also came out on the very same day, the 26th of February 2021. Now, why am I bringing this up? The land was set aside in terms of the Communal Land Act. The Communal Land Act does not have a provision for setting aside state land for any purposes outlined in that act. So here we are with Statutory Instrument 50 of 2021 saying this land has been set aside for the production of lucerne or for irrigation, whichever way you like it. And on the other hand, we have Statutory Instrument 51 of 2021, which is saying the same land is now state land, which cannot be subjected to any provisions of the Communal Land Act. So to the extent that this land is now state land, it was illegal to have it set aside in terms of the Communal Lands Act. This is the first point which I want to make on the illegality of the setting aside of that land. But assuming that maybe my interpretation of the law is not correct, still, the setting aside of that land for irrigation or for lucerne production, maybe for the purpose of this interview, let me say for the purpose of lucerne production, because I do not believe that it is for irrigation purposes, but it's an issue for another day which we will be dealing with. So the setting aside of this land for lucerne production suffers so many illegal challenges. The first one, the statutory instrument itself is not consistent with the enabling act, the Communal Land Act. The statutory instrument violates the act upon which it purports to be acting in terms of. For instance, Communal Lands Act says where you are going to set aside the land for any purposes outlined in the land, in the act, the statutory instrument must specify the date with effect from which the statutory instrument says. What the authorities are saying is not more powerful than what the statutory instrument says. The statutory instrument requires people to depart permanently with immediate effect. So what they are saying is not backed by the statutory instrument which they've introduced. So if they wanted the people not to be moved with immediate effect, they should have specified that in the statutory instrument. They should have made a provision for that to happen. So who do we listen to? Social media stories, the propaganda that we are getting from the authorities, or we listen to the piece of legislation which is binding upon every individual who is concerned. So I think it's fair for us to stick to what the statutory instrument says, as opposed to what the authorities are saying in trying to defeat the arguments which are being raised in the public domain, the arguments which are being raised in the courts of law by those who are affected by that decision.
I've seen a lot of discussion in terms of the amended statutory instrument where the corrections have been made. Does it significantly change what was written in statutory instrument 50? It
doesn't. It doesn't change the substance of statutory instrument 50 of 2021. For instance, it doesn't take away the fact that people were not consulted before an adverse decision was made. I was going to say that in terms of our law, in terms of section 68 of the Constitution, the people of Chilonga have an administrative right, an administrative conduct that is lawful, prompt, efficient, reasonable, substantively and procedurally fair. In this instance, we are saying, is it fair? Is it reasonable? Is it lawful for the authorities to say that we are taking your land with immediate effect? The authorities have not provided any alternative, comparable, arable land. You rightly mentioned right from the onset in your introductory remarks that this is their communal land where they do their agricultural production. The land is their only source of livelihoods. It's more than just soil to them. They've lived on the land. They depend upon the land. This is where they are being sheltered. Their houses are there. Everything that you may... The real essence of life from their perspective is defined by the very same land that has been set aside. And now we are saying, is it lawful, is it reasonable for the authorities to say, we are taking away this land without providing an alternative piece of land for you to be relocated, without providing an alternative basic shelter and housing, without providing basic health care? Is it fair? Is it reasonable? Is it lawful? Without even giving you an opportunity to consider other issues like how are we going to relocate with our livestock, what are we going to be doing, and are there schools in the areas that will be relocated to? In fact, the government has not provided any piece of land for them to go. So it means they have to look for the land themselves, these affected people. They have to look for an alternative piece of land where they can go and resume their normal lives, which they've been used to, on the piece of land that has been taken away by the authorities.
Yeah, let's talk about the aspect of human rights.
Yes.
Because you are Zimbabwe lawyers for human rights. At what point does human rights come into this to the picture?
The whole move, the whole statutory instrument speaks of violations of human rights from whichever angle you want to look at it. Compulsory deprivation of their property in violation of property rights is enunciated under section 71 of the Constitution. These are property rights. Their property is gone. There is no compensation whatsoever. I've heard some people saying that they are going to benefit from the project, but like I said, I don't read much into what people say more than what the statutory instrument says. So there is no compensation. They've lost their property. They've lost the essence of their livelihoods. They've lost their productive land. They don't know where to go with their livestock. They don't know what will become of their tomorrow. So this is littered with violation of human rights. They have not been consulted before an adverse decision has been made. This is a basic right in our Constitution. Before you make an adverse decision against someone, you ought to consult them. Granted, in terms of that piece of legislation which was used, the Communal Land Act, it talks of consultation with the Rural District Council. It does not even talk of consulting the very people who have been affected by the decision.
I was saying they don't really own this land because according to the Communal Lands Act, this land belongs to the president of this country, so it's not generally their land, is it?
You are very correct that in terms of the Communal Land Act, in particular Section 4, all the communal land is vested in the President of the Republic of Zimbabwe. But in terms of the very same Act, Section 7, they have the right of use and occupation of the very same land. So they do not have ownership right, but they have the right of use and occupation. So those rights have been violated. How do you take away the land from somebody who acquired the right of use and occupation without consulting them, without offering an alternative piece of land for their use and occupation? That is clearly unlawful.
But does it make sense that the land is vested, is given to the president? Does it really make sense?
Well, first of all, we must appreciate that the Communal Land Act, we have inherited it from the colonial piece of legislation, the Land Apportionment Act. We have, like I said, we've prepared something in terms of which we intend to challenge the constitutionality of that piece of legislation. There are so many issues
with the Communal Land Act.
Indeed, with the Communal Land Act. I also spoke about how it takes away the right to be consulted. It says it's only the rural district council which can be consulted, and there are so many clauses in that act which are inconsistent with the provisions of the Constitution which came into effect in 2013. So there is clearly a lack of alignment between the Constitution and this piece of legislation, a battle which we are at an advanced stage in trying to bring before the court, and I have no doubt it will not stand the test of constitutionality. So as far as we are concerned, there are so many issues with regards to that act which should be dealt with by the courts.
But this brings in a new dimension, doesn't it, that all rural folks, all people in rural areas or on communal lands are living on borrowed time, because if the land doesn't belong to them, the president can just move them when he or she wants.
Like I said, this is one of the repressive pieces of legislation which was inherited from the colonial regime.
And we are perfecting it.
Indeed, we've just adopted it, and we've become the good disciples of those repressive laws. You will recall that the very same people of Chilonga, going back to Chilonga, were once domiciled in an area which is now called Bonakzingwa National Park. They were removed from that area to pave way for the national park. They complied, and then they were also evicted from Hippo Valley, Triangle, Mukasim Estate to pave way for the production of sugarcane. So really, the piece of legislation has become also a political tool. You only stay in the communal land at the pleasure of the political authorities or of the president, if I were to put it that way. So clearly, it is unimaginable that in the year 2021, we still have people who fought in the liberation struggle for their land rights still begging and still living at the mercy of the politicians. Once they cease to do what pleases the politicians, they lose the right to occupy, they lose the right to enjoy the land, the piece of land that they've been occupying. This is ancestral land that we're talking about. This is where their forefathers are buried. This is their entire lives are defined in terms of the piece of land that they are being ordered to permanently depart from.
Let's just look at as we close. What are the options available to the people in Chilonga, and do you think that they can get justice at the end of the day?
Definitely, as a lawyer, the first approach that I would go for is legal. I've demonstrated how illegal this whole statutory instrument is, how illegal this whole move is, how unconstitutional the Communal Land Act is. They have an option of approaching the courts for recourse. They can approach the courts to have the statutory instrument 5th of 2021 declared illegal. But for me, that would be a temporary victory, because we still have this monster called the Communal Land Act in their way, which can be abused at any time. So I would opt for a holistic approach where the entire act is challenged, the constitutionality of that act is challenged, and once it is declared unconstitutional, that would bring some sort of permanent victory on the part of the rule of law. But I would also want to appreciate the political nature with which these events have been occurring. I believe that there is need for politicians really to sit down and deal with these issues. When I talk of politicians, I'm not restricting myself to the ruling party, even the different opposition political parties. They should sit down. These are the very same constituencies which they purport to be representing. People are not only relevant for the purposes of voting them into power. They remain people with rights which should be protected by those elected individuals, the politicians. So they should sit down, they should go back to the drawing board and say, is this how we want history to record us? Is this how we want other nations to think that this is how we treat our citizens, our people? Remember the Kenyan experience, the Ethiopian people, they were ill-treated in like manner. I don't see any difference between the way they were treated by their politicians and the way the Chilonga people are being treated. And we all know the result. So we don't want the international community to really intervene and say, this is how we should be running your country. Let sanity prevail amongst our politicians. Let's go back to the drawing board and say, guys, we are ill-treating our people. We are taking away their rights. We have every opportunity, we have every room to make right those moves which we got wrong. So the ball is in their court. They should sit down and reverse whatever they did. If they don't want the embarrassment of being continuously dragged before the courts, if they don't want the embarrassment of having the courts declare their conduct illegal, if they don't want the embarrassment of having the international community condemn them. So for me, this is what I see as the way forward. If they can't go back to the drawing board, then we are left with no option except approaching the courts.
In your concluding remarks, Obey, I want you to address the people of Chilonga and also address the government of the day.
I say to the people of Chilonga, I know you've suffered a lot. You've been victims of these displacements at the hands of government authorities. We've kept quiet for too long. This time around, we can't afford to keep quiet. We will fight. We'll do everything within our power and means to fight this illegal conduct by the authorities. We will be going to courts. On a daily basis, we shall be fighting for your rights. Let's remain calm. Let's remain united. We are all one big family. We know our rights, we know our ancestors have suffered from the time of the colonial regime, and we continue to suffer. Like we agreed back in 2020 that there are steps which we should take, legal steps we should take to protect our rights. We will continue along that path. And to the government, we say these are your people, these are your children. There is no need to take away their right just in a bid to please a few individuals, a few private companies. Surely, if the Lucerne production business was genuine bona fide, I see no justification for not involving the locals. They are capable of doing the same business. Why not give them the project of growing Lucerne so that they can have earnings from that project? We know this is not the first time that they've been displaced from their homes. Surely it is very difficult for us to believe the bona fides of this intended move. And it is never too late for you to reverse this move. For me, these are my parting remarks.
We're seeing this issue of Chilonga unfolding. Now, as Human Rights Watch, what is your view to the Chilonga aspect that is unfolding at the moment?
Thank you, Blessed. I think we need to sort of approach this issue of Chilonga within a context, a historical context of previous displacements and evictions in the same Chirezi district in 2014, the Tokwe Mkosi Dam Basin, where 20,000 people were displaced and moved to Chingwizi in Mwenezi. And that was done in a way that was fraught with human rights problems in terms of consultations, in terms of compensation, in terms of provision of alternative land. Having said that, the Chilonga case is really about the due process of law and about ensuring that whatever happens, the rights of the Chilonga people are protected, their dignity is secured. So there is no contestation whatsoever about whether or not Minister July Moyo has a right in terms of the Communal Land Act to issue a legal notice to take over communal land and move people elsewhere. That is accepted. But in Zimbabwe, in terms of Section 74 of the Constitution of Zimbabwe, no eviction can take place outside of a court order that is issued after consideration of all the issues. So that is the first point that needs to be addressed, to make sure that if there is to be any evictions, they are not forced evictions and they are in compliance with the law. That is very important. And some of the issues that need to be taken into consideration before evictions can take place include full informed prior consultations. We know that Minister July Moyo has been on record as having consulted with the chiefs and the Chirezi Rural District Council on April 30 last year. But that is not sufficient because there is not enough information about compensation, about reasonable notice, because you cannot issue a statutory instrument 5th of 2021, which says the notice to move or to depart is with effect from the date of publication of that notice on 26 February 2021. That is problematic and it has to be addressed. Now, it is important where we are now because the people of Chilonga have approached the High Court of Zimbabwe in Masvingo, and through their lawyers, the Zimbabwe Environmental Law Association, ZELA, and through the support organization, community-based MACRAD Trust, the Masvingo group, they've approached the courts and they've asked for the evictions to be stopped and for the government to comply with the law. And they are also challenging the validity and constitutionality of the statutory instrument itself, as well as Section 9 and 10 of the Communal Land Act. So now we await the outcome from the High Court of Masvingo. And we hope that the government of Zimbabwe, the authorities involved, will respect the rule of law and respect the outcome or the court order which might be issued with regards to the people of Chilonga. Those are my initial remarks in terms of what's happening. Thanks.
But there are arguments that wherever there is development, you know, for communities and changing of circumstances, people are moved. And sometimes they resist, but it's for their benefit. Do you think that there's any benefit for the people of Chilonga for this investment, as it is being said it is?
Well, the short answer is we don't know, but what needs to happen in terms of due process of law is that the people of Chilonga themselves must be involved in the planning, in the consultations, and must have enough and accurate information. So if we have the people of Chilonga resisting, it means that there are concerns or issues. But beyond that, it's not about opposing developmental projects. It is about following the law in implementing those projects. So the process of moving people in Zimbabwe in terms of the law cannot happen without a court order, right? And we are saying the government must follow that. The process cannot happen with the people not knowing where they will be moved and what land tenure they will have in that new space. The people cannot be moved without a resolution of the issue of compensation. You understand? So what we are saying is that, and it cannot be an arbitrary process. It cannot be forced eviction. It must be in compliance with the law. And the people must know, and the authorities, including the investors, must also address issues of infrastructural development. Where these people are to go, will they be roads, will they be clinics, hospitals, schools, and so on and so forth. And we saw that it was not the case with the Chingwizi case, where up to this day, many of the families have not been compensated, have not received alternative land, and are living in tents, even as we speak. So the government of Zimbabwe has a history with the Chirezi district of failing to compensate, of failing to live up to its human rights obligations. And we are saying, we are simply pointing to the Constitution of Zimbabwe, Section 74, to say comply with it fully. And also, in addition, Zimbabwe has ratified the African Union Convention on the Rights of Displaced People, the otherwise called the Kampala Convention. And this convention prohibits arbitrary displacements, and it says all these things that we have spoken about must be addressed before people are moved. So it's not about saying the people cannot be moved, but to say, when you are involved in that process, please follow the steps laid out in the law and protect the dignity and the rights of these 13,840 people who will be harmed or affected negatively by this process to make way for the growing of grass for cattle feed.
But as a Zimbabwean, Dale, do you think that this could in some way amount to a reversal of the land redistribution or the land revolution in Zimbabwe?
Well, yes, clearly. And that is what people are beginning to say, that look, you want to displace 13,840 people to make way for a white farmer to grow grass. So it could be a reversal, yes. But that is not the only problem with this project. The main problem is that there is no transparency, there is no accountability, there is no information, and the rights of the people are at risk. They have not been addressed, and we know that the very same government has previously failed to address the needs of people it has displaced and relocated. So we are saying this process is not a natural disaster. It is a man-made program of development. So it can be planned for. the government must publish its plans, its consultations, and must address issues of compensation and alternative land with secure tenure before it moves to issue a notice to evict these families.
So, in your submission, this is an issue of lack of trust between citizen or the governed versus the governing.
Not quite, but it is an issue of jumping the gun, of putting the cart before the horse. Because what I am saying really is the issue of trust that does not and should not arise. What should arise is to ask, has the government followed the laid down procedure in terms of the law, the clear steps that must be followed before families can be uprooted? That's the critical question. And the short answer so far is no. Why? Because Section 74 of the Zimbabwe Constitution is clear. It's very short. It says there shall be no evictions in Zimbabwe without a court order that is issued after all considerations have been met. Order. The argument that a statutory instrument can trump, the provisions of the Constitution is contested. And this is why the people of Chilonga, through their lawyers, have approached the courts. And now we are asking the government to put a moratorium to hold on the process and wait for the outcome of the court process and then respect the outcome of that court process. This is called a right to due process of law. If you are aggrieved by a decision by the government, before it can damage your rights, you can quickly approach the courts and ask for a remedy, for recourse, to say, please, can you correct this before I suffer irreparable damage? And in this case, we are talking about large numbers of people. According to the official government sources, we are talking about 13,840 people who will be affected by this project and who are resisting because there hasn't been any talk about compensation or alternative land. Those things must be addressed before they can be talk of eviction.
Thank you very much, Dewa, for joining us on this program. We will cross over to the lawyers who are representing the Chilonga community and hear from them, because as far as we know, government has said that it has consulted, but what is turning out on the ground is that there's no consultation, because if there was consultation, you would not have seen the process of the law going on. And we earlier on in the past 2 weeks, we were in Chilonga. We managed to speak to the people who will be affected, and their voices have been clear. We spoke to the people who will be affected, their headmen, and also spoke to government sources. The people of Chilonga are saying they were moved from Gonarejo. They were also moved as Triangle was setting up, and they settled in those areas. They made a life in those areas, and they believe that it is their home and it is their right to stay there. And they want to defend that right to stay there and continue with their lives as they have known it. And we will continue to keep track of this issue and as a human rights issue, and we'll continue. This program was brought to you again in partnership with Macrad, who have been following this case closely since its inception. Thank you very much, Dewa Mafunga, for joining us this afternoon.
Thank you so much, Blessed, for having me. Thank you so much, and all the best. Thank you.
Thank you.
Comrade July Moyo,
enacted the communal land setting aside of land Chiredzi notice, which was published as statutory instrument 50 of 2021. On the same day, Mr. Mnangagwa enacted another statutory instrument, the communal land bracket excision of land notice, which was publicized as statutory instrument 51 of 2021. The net effect of these statutory instruments is to set aside, is to confiscate 12,940 hectares of land located in the Chilonga area of Chiredzi from being communal lands, from being owned by the communities there to be owned by a private entity, Denderi, which will embark on a grass growing exercise. The grass is known in Latin as lucerne. 5 dominant issues that we established. Firstly, we established that this is an extensive program of displacement. The government is going to displace these people in 3 phases. So phase 1 covers 12,500 people, and 12,940 hectares of land have already been exercised. Phase 2 and phase 3 will take more land, so that the total land that they intend to take is 21,000 hectares, and that's a massive, piece of land from these communities. The second thing that we also established is that there is no plan. There is no plan by the government. There are no concrete plans of the relocation of these individuals. So they don't know where they are going. We asked in Parliament last week on Wednesday where they intend to take the communities. The government itself doesn't have an answer. So you have got this strange program by a strange government that seeks to displace thousands of people, but it doesn't know where to relocate them. And all of us know that in the past relocations, for instance, Transao, in Manicaland, they failed and failed dismally because there was no one who planned for the relocation of these communities. The third issue which the community is asking is, why us? This is a community that has been displaced twice in its history. In 1963, for instance, the Ian Smith government displaced this community to create and make way for the sugar estates under Hippo Valley and Tongat Hullet. So they were displaced, thousands and thousands of them were displaced to make room for Hippo Valley. The second phase of the displacement before independence was to make way for Gonare-Jou National Park. So as I said, Gonare-Jou, this community is in the heart of the Lower Veld, the southeastern part of the Lower Veld. So Gonare-Jou is right in the middle of their communities. So they were displaced to create room for this nature reserve called Gonare-Jou, which some of you who know it know that it runs into thousands and thousands of hectares. Third, they were displaced to create the nature reserve that is known as Malilangwe, that is controlled by Malilangwe Trust. So again, they were moved. And when they were moved, they went literally and metaphorically in no man's land, where they rebuilt their lives. They rebuilt a fresh community, where they faced tsetse fly, wild animals, heat, and incessant droughts. And over the years, they've become master farmers in small grains, particularly sorghum, millet, and so forth. The area can't do maize because it doesn't have sufficient rains. So they've become masters of small grains. And as we are talking to you right now, they are subcontracted through contract farming by Delta Corporation to actually make small grains that are used in the production of traditional brews by Delta, brews such as Chibuko. And these are people, if you recall, we have been in Zimbabwe for over 500 years. Shaka Zulu's Mfekwani took place in 1830. The founder of what we now call the Shangani people in Zimbabwe was Soshangan, who was Chaka's general who left Zululand in 1830 to settle in Mozambique after displacing and conquering the Tsonga people to establish what was known as the Gaza Estate. And the Gaza Estate, if you know, extended into Zimbabwe. It covered Mozambique and then it extended into Mozambique, into Zimbabwe, in the Lower Veld, extended into South Africa, into Transvaal. So they've been, the Shangani community have been in this country for over 5 centuries. To be precise, they've been in this country for 491 years. So they are part of Zimbabwe. They're not foreigners, they're not invaders, they are part of Zimbabwe. They've been occupying this land in Mozambique, in South Africa, and in Zimbabwe for a period in excess of 500 years after Soshangani established the Gaza Estate. So they get concerned, and here I'm reproducing their own testimonies. They get concerned by a government that they themselves think has got a grudge against the people of Nguni extraction in this country. They pointed out to us that Gukura Hundi was inflicted against the Ndebele people, who are people of Nguni extraction. They pointed out that part of the people who were displaced over Marange diamonds were the Ndaus, who are again people of Nguni extraction. Now, they themselves, the Shangani, again of Nguni extraction, are now being targeted. And they identify certain individuals in the current government who have been involved in the assault, the predatory assault on Nguni people from Gukura Hundi to the present day. So they keep on asking, if you don't want us as Nguni people in this country, please tell us so that we go back to South Africa and we go back to Mozambique. So what we found there is that the Chilonga displacement raises a major question of the national question in Zimbabwe. What does it mean to be a Shangani in Zimbabwe? What does it mean to be a Ndau in Zimbabwe? What does it mean to be a Ndebele in Zimbabwe? What does it mean to be a Tonga in Zimbabwe? What does it mean to be an ethnic minority in Zimbabwe? These are the hard questions that we found villagers and communities telling us there, traditional leaders telling us there. It's a deep, deep, deep issue. And they were speaking from their hearts, as you see from some of the video content that we brought from Zimbabwe. And one villager said, if you don't want us, tell us so that we go back to Mozambique. If you don't want us, tell us so that we go back to South Africa. So it's a story of alienation. It's a story of reification. It's a story of exclusion. It's a story of fear. It's a story of torture. When you speak to them, it's almost like you are talking and you are in another country, not Zimbabwe. But there's no sense of belonging. There is no sense of ownership. There is no sense that I'm a Zimbabwean. I mean, for Christ's sake, 41 years after independence, a Zimbabwean uses an MTN card to communicate. A Zimbabwean goes and buys petrol in Mozambique. So it's shocking what we saw there. The fourth issue that they are raising is that there are so many farms that were taken during the land reform program in Masvingo province, in Chiredzi itself, in Mwenezi itself. So their argument is, look, if a white man wants to do grass for cattle, surely why don't you start with these farms that are already redundant, that are growing grass anyway, natural grass, so you can mix the cow grass with natural grass that is already there, and the snakes that are there, the blackjack that are already there. Because they pointed out to some of these farms, we were told of a Mr.